Hello, guys, and thank you for joining me. So today we're looking at Neil Rennie coaching guide for first timers prep. Now, in reality, this can kind of work for whether it's your first time prepping, your second time prepping, or your seasoned competitor. It'll also work in terms of if it's your first time photo shoot because there's a lot of factors that are kind of very similar. Basically, the difference is the extremity, the length, and how lean someone needs to get, and also a very definite endpoint. But I think this could be very useful for a magnitude of different things as well. So today, some of the topics that we're going to cover are creating a good start point, reverse engineering your prep, planning out your calories and expenditure, evaluating your progress, rate of loss, when to make changes, training performance and recovery, refeeds, off-plan meals, mindset and what to expect. That's a big one because, as a first timer doing this, you just have no idea of what you're going to go through. And the clearer somebody can be with you and coach you through that, the better. Also, looking at selecting your federations, and then we're going to look and end with some case studies. So it's pretty comprehensive when it comes to this. There's a few things that we can add on, and certainly I'll invite some questions once you view it. However, this is the main sort of bulk of everything that you'll need to know and decisions to make for yourself potentially. So creating a good start point, I'll just move myself down here. It's imperative before starting to prep that you've dedicated enough time to actually building muscle. Like ideally, I would like to be working with somebody for a good 6 months prior before we're even starting to prep. That allows me, first of all, to get to know the psychology of the person, also to build actual good habits and make sure that somebody is in a position where they can prep. So, building up a reasonable amount of calories to start with, lower starting expenditure, have instilled good habits and routine, as we've said, and not starting out with too high a body fat set point. The more cards you have to play during a prep, the better. Essentially, I want to create an environment where you're going into prep at your strongest, not hungry in the slightest, ready to diet down, and have no emotional attachment to food, training, that you are ready to go. If we can be in that position, we're going to have a very successful and smoother prep as well. So this is a case study of Michael. And you can see with Michael, I was with Michael for 18 months. There was 5 months of that we were prepping, but a lot of that was coming from recomping at his very start point, down, getting dieted down, then pushing back up again for quite a period of time. And you can see that's Michael at the peak of his off season. And the thing, what I will say when it comes to off season, is you have to embrace this part as much as you embrace your prep. That means not just eating shit, essentially, for the sake of eating shit, but having a periodized plan, because one leads directly into the other. And it's an unglamorous side of it, but you don't get the instant validation that you do when you're prepping, but it is so integral, and I cannot stress enough how much of an importance it is. A lot of people will get to stage and feel a little bit underwhelmed with the amount of muscle they're carrying, simply because they have not dedicated enough time to actual bodybuilding, which is building your body. Don't get me wrong, dieting is hard, it's intensive. However, off seasons are long, and they're often what people find more difficulty with because they just don't stay as consistent. So you can see with Michael, this was peak bulk at 110 kilos, and even on stage at around 86 kilos, very lean, and done exceptionally well in his class in PCA Newcastle, where he came second in classic physique. So it was a massive step up for Michael. This was the same weight as what you started at, but obviously a very different body composition as well. So we're going to talk now about reverse engineering your prep. And what I mean by that is essentially, how long have you got? How long do you need? And working backwards and taking the appropriate steps. And this is something that goes with anything, whether it be business or body composition. It's actually, what is your vision? Where do you need to get? And how do you work back for that? I would say, now this is dependent, but for the majority of people I am prepping, that prep will last around 16 to 20 weeks. It's very much dependent at the start on, okay, how much body fat are you carrying? How quickly do we need to get ready for the show? So if we've got a date and that's the only date you want to do, then obviously we need to be ready in that time. And that might mean pushing things a little bit harder. There's so many different tactics in which we can utilize, whether it's a slower, longer prep where we're not being quite as aggressive in our changes, or a faster, more aggressive prep. Which one's better? There's a middle ground, and often that's where the answer lies. Another thing that will affect the time scale and length of your prep is, are you natural or enhanced? Obviously, if we're enhanced, there's certain tools that we can utilize. If you're natural, then I would suggest a slightly slower and longer prep, because essentially we're trying to keep as much muscle tissue on as you can. And if you don't have supplementation or aids there to help with that, then you're going to take a little bit longer. There's also strategies. So are we going to be refeeding more? Are we going to be just linearly dieting into the shows? Are we going to be taking diet breaks? And all these are encompassed in what goes into prep. And I think you can plan out a lot, but also leaving enough time that if things do go wrong, if you do slip up, because it is your first prep, if you get sick, if something pops up in the way, life pops up in the way, then we have enough time to make sure we still get there. And also that person's individual psychology. And that's something that I think a lot of people do overlook is, right, how do you feel about dieting? Because a lot of this is mindset. Would you rather a faster, harder approach, or would you rather a slightly longer, slower approach? I find, again, with the majority of my clients, it is a 16 to 20 week prep. I have personally done shorter, very aggressive, fast preps, and I've done ones that have over 12 weeks, 10 weeks, and ones that have lasted 20 weeks. And honestly, with preference, I do prefer 20 weeks. It doesn't consume you quite as much and take quite as much away, but both are most definitely options there. So now we're going to look at planning out calories and expenditure. This again will often depend on the individual start point, but also how long have you got until the show. So like we talked about in the last one, the main variables we have to play with for the most part, if we're taking away the enhanced side of things, is input versus output. So essentially your calories and your expenditure. So how much food you're taking in and how much cardio you're doing, how much steps you're doing as well. And that's obviously going to relate very, very heavily to how hard we push somebody or how slow we go. Again, I like that little bit longer when it comes to prep length. And ideally, we're starting off with quite a lot of input and very little output, because these are then tools that we can utilize throughout the prep, and it makes it that little bit smoother as we go. What I find is that bigger guys tend to be able to pull more from calories before dipping into expenditure, where with smaller females, it tends to end up eating a little bit less and doing quite high amounts of cardio. Now, that may seem unfair. Like, why is that? Why does that happen? But essentially, if you are a male, sometimes they're enhanced, or just a male that carries a lot of muscle mass, then your metabolic rate is going to be higher. You need more food. Just by moving, you burn more calories. So it's easier to get leaner to a point, I will say. Where if you are a 50 kilo female and you're still needing to lose body fat, then obviously your calorie needs are going to be that little bit lower. But also, how many calories can we start pulling away there? So you might be on 1,300 calories anyway. So if we need to keep pulling to 1,000 calories, 900 calories, then at that point, okay, it might be better to add some more cardio in rather than just continue to pull away at food. Where for the bigger guys, if they're starting already on 5,000 calories, we could pull them to 3,000 calories and it's still a decent amount of food. So we don't necessarily need any direct cardio in at that point. As I say, ideally, I will have clients on small amounts of cardio to start with and relatively high food before starting prep. Like ideally, I would have somebody on maybe 2 20-minute cardio sessions per week just for general health and as much food as they can handle while still staying in a good body composition and seeing performance moving forward. And a lot of time what this does is when we have this set point, it allows for a little bit more of an aggressive start to prep. So essentially we can drop calories a little bit quicker at the start while energy is good, while motivation is very high, and we see quite a big and quick result from that. We drop water, we drop some body fat, and we're not really feeling the pinch, let me say, of prep in terms of it really pulling away from your energy. So that is an ideal start point for us if we're doing as many tools as we have available at any given time. And just to give a few examples of this, and this is going to relate to some of the females and some of the guys. So this is Kelsey. Again, with Kelsey, with most of my clients have worked with me for at least 18 months, some longer than that, some I've worked with for 3 to 5 years as well. So Kelsey, when she came, you can see it's a very dramatic, different body composition, and Kelsey has done phenomenal. She's completely changed her life around during this time. But Kelsey's starting weight was only 57 kilos. That is not a big girl. We pulled her down to 47 kilos for the show. So obviously that requires, if you're 57 kilos, you're probably not eating a huge amount of calories anyway. So the lowest total calories, now this was at the very end, Kelsey got down to 1,000 calories. And I can't say that, and she would admit herself that she wasn't overly hungry on this. However, I think it's sometimes when you're in that mindset, you block out the hunger to some degree. And cardio was up for 45 minutes every day. Now, obviously, we didn't just start at that. Calories did start at 1,700, but they had to keep getting chipped down. We did the occasional refeed in there as well. And cardio started at 320 minutes and progressed up to daily of 7 45-minute cardio sessions per week. But if you want to be in true stage condition and be competitive, sometimes you've got to do what it takes. And that's the truth of it. Now, Kelsey, again, she won her class at GBO show, and she came second in her bikini class at PCA in Ireland. So a phenomenal achievement, especially given the starting point. The better your starting point, the easier prep will be, but it's never easy. Another example is Scott. So Scott was a junior last year in men's bodybuilding. So he was a first-time junior competitor. He was a powerlifter, so his background was very much in moving a weight from A to B rather than how you move a weight from A to B. We started at 92 kilos. Scott was already on around 4,000 calories per day. The man very much likes his food. He was on stage at 78 kilos, and again, came second in his class as well. So, I mean, again, a very, very good result and a very good end package as well. Now, we started on 4,000 calories, but food still had to come down to 1,800 over time. But as you can see, cardio didn't get quite as high. It was at 540 minutes per week. Still a relatively decent amount of cardio, but not something that was a massive undertaking for him. The food is where we had the majority of the pulls. And again, this relates back to client psychology. Scott didn't like doing cardio. He'd rather have pulled food. He was okay with his hunger signaling. He wasn't craving food massively. So that meant, okay, that gave us the green light by working together, by communicating that this was maybe we could pull from food rather than putting so much in from cardio. And again, that's my personal preference. But again, it's whatever works for the individual. And if we see a good result of it, then we run with it until we don't see a result from it. Evaluating your progress. So this is a big one, especially if you're self-coached. And what I will say, if you are self-coached and this is your first time doing a show, then it's something I would think about, maybe actually getting a coach. And that's not a plug, but it is a plug. Because at the same time, if you've never done this before, you don't know what to expect, you don't know what you're looking for, it's harder to read the signs. But the more you do this, the more you can read those signs. So evaluating your progress, and it is where an experienced coach comes in handy. So a big one for me is progress videos are my main indicator. Photos are good, but to me, video shows more because you see movement in the muscle. You see how somebody poses as well, because ultimately you got to practice your posing, and that's something we'll talk about. That's how you present yourself on stage. It doesn't matter how good you are if you can't show how good you are. So videos are a big one for me. Scale weight is important, but it's only important to a degree, and it can't be the gospel. You can't become so emotionally involved in it. But ultimately, we should see scale weight dropping down as we go. There are other biofeedback markers, like how's your sleep, how's your training performance being a big one. We don't want to see a massive slide off in training performance. If we do, it's likely we're probably losing muscle and maybe not feeding the body enough. Me personally, I'd have an educated guess at predicting somebody's stage weight. So if they come to me, I can kind of usually tell within a few kilos of where they need to be to land on stage in good condition. Now, obviously, if you've done this before and this is your second or third time competing, you'll have previous data. So my guys that are going in for a second season will know where their stage weight was last year. We'll kind of have a good indication of, okay, how much muscle have we gained during the off season? So then how much do we need to sort of weigh on stage? Again, this is always, it's best guess. We're never 100% right, but I've got quite a skill at being quite close to it, and that's not blowing my own trumpet. So to say, I'll also have a predicted rate of loss relative to the body weight, but this is only a guideline. So this rate of loss should be closer to the stage weight as well. It should slow down. The closer you get to your stage weight, the slower this rate of loss should be. So what do I mean by that? For example, if I know somebody is 200 pound and needs to be 170 pound on stage, then we will know a percentage of loss that we are looking for each week. At the start, I tend to go a little bit quicker. So that might be 1 to 1.5% loss of body weight per week. But obviously, as we slow down, as we start to fatigue, we don't want to be pushing you into more of a hole. Recovery, which we will talk about soon, is vastly important. So you'll see that rate of loss drop to maybe 0.5% to week. And some weeks will not have any. Some weeks will try and maintain. We'll potentially refeed, in which the scale weight will go up. But it's a nice indicator of where we should be at any given time. When to make changes. And this is a big one, because as you go through your prep, it's very, very unlikely that you will not make any changes to your prep. Changes will happen to keep things ticking along. It doesn't necessarily mean you're not in the right place. It means we just need to keep moving in the right direction. As a coach, I react to what I see in front of me. If falling behind, we can make changes based on certain variables. So that would be, we can look at, can we up cardio a little bit? Can we increase your expenditure? Because what you'll find is during prep, when you start to tire, start to fatigue, your body starts to slow down. Maybe you're not walking around the house as much. Maybe your expenditure, total daily expenditure, will take a little bit of a hit. So if we're tracking steps, it means that we can stay on top of that and make sure we at least maintain a baseline. We can reduce calories, we can reduce carbohydrate, we can reduce fat. I tend to keep protein in and around the same the majority of the time, because we're trying not to lose muscle. And that protein is what's making up that muscle for the most part. Training volume, it may have to reduce as you start to fatigue, because at this point, we're only trying to maintain our muscle tissue. At the back end of the prep, we're building no muscle. It's how do we maintain it and not get injured? Rest and refeed. So again, if we feel okay, progress is stagnating a little bit, maybe we're holding a little bit too much fluid. Okay, maybe we need a rest, maybe we need a refeed to just top everything up, freshen things up, fill out a little bit before moving back down again. And then, of course, if you are enhanced, we can look at PED selection, what we're utilizing, how much, adding other compounds in. So these are all tools, again, that we have in our arsenal to keep things moving along. Training, performance, and recovery. This is a big one. From a mindset point, as soon as people enter a diet, they feel that they're going to get weaker, and that is simply not the case. Often you will find when your routine is nailed, when your sleep is more nailed down, when your food is more nailed down, as it often is during a prep, that training performance actually increases to begin with. It's imperative that we upkeep gym performance as much as possible throughout a prep. Now, that's not to say it will not slide off a little bit, but the old saying, what built it keeps it, is largely pretty accurate. Not 100% accurate, but largely very accurate. As our ability to recover lessens, volume may actually reduce. So rather than doing more at the back end of a prep, when we're very dieted, we're very fatigued, we actually might do a little bit less. So we've got a thing called minimum effective volume versus maximum recoverable volume. When we're training in our off season, we're trying to build as much tissue as possible. It's likely that we are training with as much volume and as much intensity as possible to break down that tissue. However, when we're at the back end of a prep, as I say, we don't really have the abundance of calories to actually build any more muscle. So we end up training with a little bit less volume, maybe even potentially a little bit less of intensity. But I tend to keep intensity quite high and volume maybe dropped off a little bit. And then also consider riskier loading patterns. So at the very end, tendons will feel tight, muscles will feel a little bit tight, you'll be holding a lot less fluid. Maybe we consider certain loading patterns. So maybe a big heavy RDL 3 weeks out, is it the smartest option? From my experience, I done it last year, 4 weeks out, hurt my back, just was feeling very run down, very tired, was still trying to beat gym performance in numbers, and I hurt myself. And I think this is something that with the lessons, the more we do it, the more we learn, but it's definitely something to consider. Recovery is so important. So important. Like, we only get so much time that we can rest during these preps, but we need to make the most of it. Sleep being a massive one. People's sleep go out the window, and without a doubt, as we start to diet down, sleep becomes harder and harder to have for as long. But we need to try and keep a good regular bedtime routine. Like, you have your bedtime, you have your wake up time, you find time where possible to rest during the day. And I cannot bang on enough about recovery. Even things like massage, very important, especially as your body gets more beat up. Just staying on top of all them little things. Number 7, refeeds and off-plan meals. This was me 2 years ago enjoying one of my first refeed meals. Again, this was all calculated and macro planned as well. I was lucky to have that restaurant. But it can get very exciting. But also what I will say is people can become fixated on it. The first thing big red flag to me is when I hear somebody say to me, when's our first cheat meal, when they're only starting. That is not the mindset you want to go into this with. You want to go into this with the mindset that you are prepared to do what it takes. And if a refeed comes, happy days, we'll enjoy it, we'll take it. But for the most part, refeeds I do use, but usually when somebody gets leaner. Off-plan meals I tend not to use as much, and we'll talk about why that is. So refeeds, used strategically to offset diet fatigue. So as somebody starts to fatigue a lot, we start to see training performance drop, mood drops, and it's very relative to each person. That's when I tend to then use a refeed. It's usually implemented with somebody that's already lean. It's very unlikely that I will use it when somebody is sitting quite far away from their stage body fat percentage. It can be used to preserve training performance, fullness, and ultimately help hold tissue. If we start seeing performance bombing, then it's likely we need to pull back a little bit and potentially even refeed. It can also be utilized if someone's very far ahead of schedule to actually slow them down. If we're nearly ready 6 weeks out and things have come in fast and your show isn't for another 6 weeks, then we'll probably need to put some foot in so we can actually hold you there. Otherwise, we risk getting very flat and losing muscle. How do I do refeeds? It tends to be an increase in carbohydrates and perhaps a little bit of fat sometimes as well. Amounts will vary, obviously, depending on the person's size and their current intake. 2-day refeeds or back-to-back refeeds are often used as well. Again, depending on how lean somebody is, depending on how much it takes to fill somebody out. And often what I'll gauge is, what does somebody's scale weight look like the next day after one refeed? If it hasn't budged much and we're still not seeing that improvement in physique in terms of that little bit of fullness, then it's potentially then I will add a second day in as well. Carbohydrates, if somebody's only eating 150 grams of carbs a day, then maybe the refeed will be 300 to 350. If somebody's still eating 400 grams of carbs or more, then it's very likely that carbohydrate intake will be closer to 600 to 700 grams of carbs a day. And that's just very much dependent on the look. And again, as a coach, I'm looking at what do I see in front of me. Off-plan meals. Okay, so this is different than a refeed to some degree. It's basically go and enjoy yourself, have a meal. And this is something I very rarely use, and something I'll only use in like specific circumstances. Them circumstances might be if somebody's adherence is struggling, or they're about to break on their diet and they just need a little bit of normality in their life. And we'll say, right, go and have a meal with your partner. So it can be used to promote adherence. The problem with these off-plan meals is it's once you've had it, it's very hard to stop, for one, and that's experience talking there. But also, it's very difficult to track and replicate, and it's less accurate than just actually going, right, I want you to eat 600 grams of carbs today, because we don't really know what we're getting. If you go to a restaurant, like you would do in any point with even if you're trying to lose normal weight, if we can't track it and we get a good result or a negative result from that, then we don't know what we've done. So it's very, very hard to repeat that. So that's why I would tend to opt for refeeds rather than off-plan meals. Now, that might be different in the off-season because we want to inbuild a little bit of flexibility. But during a prep, I will always tend to opt for a refeed rather than an off-plan meal. Now, mindset and expectations, and this is specifically, I would say, for first-timers. This will be one of the biggest challenges of your life. But what I will say is it can be one of the most rewarding experiences of your life as well. A big thing people do is everything else goes out the window when they start prepping. It's only them, and it's a very selfish sport at times. However, what I would say is make one of your priorities during this prep is to keep everybody else in mind as well. Do not neglect relationships, okay? When the show and the stage is gone, if your friends are gone too, or your partner, that's not making for a good time. So think of making time for your partner. And that doesn't mean going out on the drink with them or going out for big meals. Make a meal together. Think of them, try and still socialize. That doesn't mean you have to be off your diet or doing things you don't want to do, but it is important to try and upkeep them. And that's always one of my goals when I'm prepping, is try and affect other people around me as little as possible. Expectation should be that you are going to be at your absolute best, that you should be able to stand on that stage when it comes to it and say, you know what, I gave it my all. I couldn't have done anything more. Couldn't have done anything more. And that's a win. Anything else is a bonus. I want to go in with all my clients to win shows. I'll not lie. I'm competitive. They're competitive. But there is no guarantee, especially as the first time. What you do is you go on stage, you get judged, you get your feedback, and you learn what you need to do. And often that's just grow more muscle. And that should be the experience. You should enjoy it for what it is, and then you can start really getting competitive. We're always going in to try and win, but we're ultimately, all we can do is our best. Sounds cliched, sounds cheesy, but it's very, very true. And understand that it is hard. It is hard at points, but it is your choice, And I think sometimes people want to make a victim of themselves for doing this, when in reality, it should actually, for the most part, be leading to a fulfillment. It should be something we can hold our hands on at the end and go, fuck, I done that. I promise, if you go in with those sort of expectations, with that sort of mindset, that you will give it your absolute all, that you can be honest and communicative with your coach, then you will take a hell of a lot from this experience. And that's something that I do a lot of groundwork with clients on, is actually preparing them for stage, what's involved in it, having a real open and honest communication in terms of relationship. There's a very much an emotional side to this as well. And if me personally, I work with clients very closely on that level because it does make a big difference. The actual physiology of it isn't massively complicated, but it's what goes up and up there. That's the difference between doing very well in this and coming out of it in a good position and not. So last little bit is going to be choosing your federation. There's an absolutely load of federations in the UK at the minute. Some very good ones, some not so good ones. You'll see with my guys, I tend to put them into PCA. I would say that as a show experience, as a competitive show, it's one of the best ones in the country. So if you're of a decent standard, that's a very good place to compete. There are other smaller tail shows which I've competed in as well. There's UKUP, there's BPA, there's GPO. So there's a lot of very good federations. And if you check out Compact Calendar, it has every show of the year up all the time. Personally, this is just a personal thing, I would avoid two bros. That's unless you're trying to be a professional bodybuilder, and it's unlikely within your first season that is your goal, unless you're some sort of genetic anomaly. It's more expensive. It's a little. I'm nothing against them either. It sounds like I do, but yeah, it's more expensive. It isn't the best show experience, but it has some of the top athletes that are wanting to turn professional. So I really would suggest, if this is your first season, PCA runs some great first-timer shows as well. That's a really good opportunity to compete on a very, very good stage. Some things we did not include, okay? So we did not include peak week strategies today. This is a massive, massive topic and something that is very important for bringing that final look to stage. Performance-enhancing drugs, the usage of it, and supplements. the whens, the whys. These could be topics by themselves, and also what to expect on show day. And because you haven't done it before, people are not sure what's going to go on, how it runs, and that can often be a little bit stressful. But having a coach there makes a big difference. If you want that, well, I'd have to sign up to Need Ready Coaching for that as well. But yeah, that's another topic altogether we could talk about as well. I just want to end with some case studies. So this was me on my show last year with everybody that was very important to me being there. So Sasha, in just 5 months, went from this physique, which is still a good physique, don't get me wrong, to this, a stage-winning physique. So she was a newbie to bodybuilding. She'd kind of done a little bit of training before, but over 5 months, we completely recamped her. And often when you haven't trained much of specifically towards bodybuilding, or you haven't been quite as on it with your nutrition, you can completely recomp your body within a matter of months. There's a genetic component to that as well. Sasha has a gift with it, and she came on very quickly. But over that time frame, she competed in 3 shows. She also was finishing her doctorate degree. So there was a lot of long hours, a lot of stress, but she managed it very, very well. She's now in her 2nd season, and she's going to be moving up to wellness. So that means it's going to be a 2-year off season. We're in the midst of now. A hell of a lot of tissue. And again, she's going to be very competitive in it as well. We then have, over that time, Sasha spent a long time in a diet phase. We didn't really ever push calories massively. In the early stages, to say the novelty was there, protein intake was high, carbohydrates in and around the training window. We started by having a lot of tools there to play with. So 0 cardio, went up to 40 minutes a day. We had an average step count of 12,000, and we had weekly refeeds towards the back end and reduced our volume of training towards the back end. And the result itself was incredible. It was a fantastic experience. It's her first time and one of my sort of first people to go to stage as well. Then Michael, who we've seen earlier, we've seen Michael fully bulked. We've seen his starting point, and now we've seen him shred it. So Michael was with me for about 18 months. As we said, we spent the first 3 months recomping before going into a 6-month gaining phase. In this phase, we took his weight way up, and we came way back down. And over an 18-week period, he competed in and around that 87, 88 kilo mark. I think he was down around 86 kilos before we just carved him up. We put a lot of food in the last few days, and it really brought his physique to life. And Michael came second, as I say, in PCA Classic Physique, which is a really big accolade to have as well. So in the last couple of years, I've put 17 people on stage in 2 years. Over that time, 7 golds, 6 silvers, 5 bronze, a lot of first-time showings from an array of different categories, from junior bodybuilding to natural to classic physique, bikini, figure, the lot. And it's honestly something that I take a huge amount of joy and a huge amount of pleasure in, and something that I love doing every single year. And the guys can attest to that. I'm sure if you reach out to anybody that's been on this picture here, they will tell you about their own experiences of it, and if it's something that you'd like to get into as well. So far in 2024, there are 15 of us going to stage. Again, some of them going into 2nd and 3rd seasons now, so it's exciting to see what can come of it. But if this is something that you're interested in, if you enjoyed this, give me some feedback on it. There'll be other ones as well going up. So I'm open to suggestions on it. But ultimately, if this is your first time prepping, if this is your first time going towards a bodybuilding show, knowing what to expect, making sure that you have the foundations laid when it comes to having enough muscle, having enough calories in play, having a very, very good starting point, and then understanding that it isn't easy, that you have to be constantly assessing your physique, making time for other people, all very, very important. But yes, guys, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. If this is something you're interested in, DM me the word transform and we can get talking.